So this morning, I want us to begin in the book of Genesis, chapter 32. So if you've got a Bible and want to flip there, or an app and want to click and swipe there, go right ahead. Genesis chapter 32. And we're going to see an account of a story that happened with a man named Jacob, and this will also be on screen. And here's what it says. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 slave women, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream along with all his possessions. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," he said. "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. "What is your name?" And he replied, "Jacob." Jacob is one of the more interesting characters that we see in the Bible, in the Old Testament. A really flawed man, but he was used by God. Here in this particular part of a story, we see that his name gets changed from Jacob to Israel. And this is really kind of in the middle of his story. So much had already happened to this guy, and so much was still yet to happen in his life and in the life of those, his descendants, those that would come after him. But even from the start, we get this idea that Jacob was going to be somebody who was going to experience conflict and turmoil. When we look at the account of his birth, which is a little bit before this in Genesis 25, it says this about his mother. When her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins in her womb. There had been a prophecy that there would be twins. The first one came out red-looking, covered with hair like a fur coat, and they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out, grasping Esau's heel with his hand. So he was named Jacob. So Jacob has a twin brother born just before him, and the scriptures tell us that he came out right after him, grabbing his heel, almost like to say, no, let me first, not you, me, and grabbing at his heel. And so he gets named Jacob, which means heel grabber. It can also mean supplanter, and a supplanter is just someone who trips someone else up to get into their position. He grabbed their heel. So Jacob was labeled based on something he did before he ever knew what he was doing. How many of you would like, as grown adults, to be labeled based on something you did when you were very small? No. How about labeled based on who you were when you were 13 or 17? God help us, right? Thank you, Jesus, I am no longer what I once was. So he was labeled from the beginning that he was going to be a heel grabber. But his name was prophetic. He was going to become someone who would get what he wanted by tripping up someone else, by deceiving, by taking advantage, by supplanting, by putting himself into a position where he did not belong. This is what he would do. You see, in this culture, there was the birthright and the blessing, and the birthright was given to the first son, and it wasn't just that he was the oldest son or the older brother. When it came time for the inheritance to be divvied up, he got a bigger portion. He got a bigger portion, so it's a pretty sweet spot to be in. And the only thing that you did to get this position was just to be born first, right? So maybe you can start to see why maybe on the way out he's grabbing onto his heel like, no, right? You see this with kids is let's have a foot race, and it's getting a little close, and so what do? They reach and they grab to try to slow them down. And Jacob was going to become someone who did this. Here's what it says in Genesis 25. It says, when the boys grew up, Esau became an expert hunter and outdoorsman, but Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game, but Rebekah, his mother, loved Jacob. So they each had their favorites. Loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field exhausted, and he said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff because I'm exhausted." And that's why he was also named Edom. It says, Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." Always trying to get something that wasn't his. "Look," said Esau, "I'm about to die, so what good is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to Jacob and sold his birthright to him. And then Jacob gave bread and lentil stew to Esau. He ate, drank, got up, and went away. So Esau despised his birthright. Jacob schemed to get into a position that wasn't his, to get something that he wanted, the birthright. But it didn't stop there. He also pretended to get the blessing. He pretended to be his brother in order to get his blessing. Now, the scriptures tell us that it was his mother's idea, but he went right along with it. And so we saw in the beginning that when Esau was born, it said that he was covered with hair, red hair, so they named him Esau. And so Jacob was apparently not that. He was a smooth man, probably much like me, very smooth. But he was going to pretend, and so he was going to go in as his father got to an advanced age and he couldn't see very well anymore. And so he decides that he would put the skin of goats on his hands and on his neck to make him feel more like his brother. I mean, how hairy was this guy? And so their father sends Esau and says, "Hey, go kill a deer. I want some venison. And bring it to me and prepare it for me the way I like. And when you bring it to me, I'm going to bless you." His mother overhears and says, "Hey, we'll kill some goat and we'll serve that to him. And we'll put these skins on and I'll get some of your brother's clothes and put them on. So that way you even smell like him. And you can go in because your father's blind, he can't see. And then he'll bless you instead, because you remember the mom had picked him as her favorite and dad had his favorite." So it says this in verse 18 of Genesis 27. When he came to his father, he said, "My father," and he answered, "Here I am." "Who are you, my son?" He couldn't tell the difference. He couldn't see. And Jacob replied to his father, "I'm Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, How did you ever find it so quickly, my son?" And he replied, "Because the Lord your God made it happen for me." Wow, now this is he's bringing God into this now, right? Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come closer so I can see, son. Are you really my son Esau or not?" So Jacob came closer to his father Isaac, and when he touched him, he said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he blessed him. He schemed to get the birthright. He pretended to get a blessing. He was doing all of this, being something that he wasn't, to get something that he wanted, to put himself into a position that he didn't belong in. And when his brother finds out, like any big brother would be, he was ticked. He actually said it this way, "He's stolen my birthright and my blessing." And he wanted to kill him. So now Rebekah says, "Jacob, you've got to go. You've got to run. He's mad. You've got to leave." So he flees the house. And Jacob got what he wanted. He got the birthright. He got the blessing. But he had to run. He got what he was after, but he lost what he had. He lost himself in the process. I think a lot of us may be experiencing something kind of like this. We're in an effort to get something, to achieve something, to be seen as something, we are actually losing reality. We are losing ourselves. Last week we talked about how we're overconnected. We talked about how we have our phones with us too much. We talked about social media. Some of us are addicted to it. We can't go 10 minutes without checking to see what's going on Facebook. And really the sad reality of all this connectedness, of social media, for instance, is that we're actually a little bit less real. Even though we're more connected, we're also more filtered. We watch reality TV shows that aren't reality at all. They're very, very scripted. It's a setup. It's phony. It's filtered. I almost think that reality may be a word that we're starting to lose in the English language. We don't really know what it means. When I start talking about reality, you can almost in your mind think, are you talking about your reality or my reality? I don't like your reality. I reject that. I'm going to embrace my own reality. Because the reality that most of us are experiencing is very controlled, very filtered. It's edited to look the way we want it to look. And we interact with people who are hiding behind online personas and filtered and rehearsed responses. There's actually a large segment of people now that have a very difficult time having unfiltered communication. These are people that if they're going to pick up the phone to order a pizza, will write out exactly what they're going to say because they're not used to unfiltered communication. Can't just walk up and have a conversation. And I think that these things have poured over into our lives because if we're honest, we all wear masks to control the way we're seen, the way we're perceived, in order to get something that we think we want. We spend an inordinate amount of time and energy trying to control the way that we're seen and perceived. It's called image maintenance. If I can control the way you see me, then I can control the way you treat me. We will post a candid photo that we took 7 shots to get it just right. That's not candid, right? It's like the opposite of candid. All right, now everybody do this, right? We're all going to jump at the same time. What is that? It's candid. It's candid. No, it was planned. Planned. That's what it was. That's a word now. This is the way we're controlling it. It's filtered. We edit it and we tweak it and we filter it. Pull out our Instagram app and we can make it look just so. So much so that there's actually a whole another side of Instagram, for instance, that people refer to as Finstagram. It's just short for fake Instagram. And it's actually where people will set up another user account and they'll only let certain people that they really trust see it, and that's where they post the unfiltered versions of their life. So they have a private one and then a public one. The public one is phony as all get out, and then the private one, that's the more real. I'm going to post the pictures of stuff that you wouldn't normally let anybody see. Some of you, the way that you're controlling this is you say, I'm just not even getting involved in that, Cary. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't do that social media stuff. But we're not perfect on the other side either. Because this isn't about social media. It isn't the problem. It just highlights it. I think our instinct is to hide. Our instinct is to pretend. That's our natural instinct. It goes all the way back further in Genesis to the Garden of Eden. And when they sinned and when they realized that they were naked and they were ashamed of the way that they appeared, they hid and they covered themselves. They tried to fashion things to cover themselves. And we're still doing it. We're still ashamed of how we look and how we're going to be perceived. And we're still hiding. And we're trying to control the way everyone around us sees us, perceives us. And just like Jacob, I believe that we wear masks to get the things that we think we need. That's the first point in your notes if you're taking notes. We wear masks to get the things that we think we need. For him, even there was, I think, something almost instinctual in him that from birth, he wanted the position that his brother would have. And he grabbed on, trying to pull himself ahead and pull his brother back. Jacob got the blessing by pretending to be someone that he wasn't. He put on a mask. But because of his deception, he had to spend about 2 decades on the run from his brother. He wanted the blessing of his father, but in receiving it, he could no longer live in the house with his father. He wore a mask. He pretended in order to get something that he thought he wanted, that he thought he needed. And he got exactly what he wanted, but he never got to enjoy it. He never got to live in it. Mark 8:36, we know this passage. For what does it benefit someone to gain the whole world and yet lose his life? What was the benefit? What good is it? Jacob supplanted. He put himself in, he tripped someone else up to get into a position. He made himself be seen a certain way. He tricked his father, he deceived, and he ripped off his brother, and he ended up having to run and hide for 20 years even away from his mother, who we know that he loved. He was close with her. What does it benefit? What good did it do him to get his father's blessing if he had to lie? What good did it do him to be blessed by Isaac and to scheme to get the birthright if he couldn't be there and stay in his father's house anymore? And for you and me, what good does it do? What benefit do we get if we get people to like us and approve of us by wearing a mask and pretending to be something that we're not? If you pretend to be something to get someone to like you or to approve of you or to affirm you, all you are doing is getting them to like someone else. That's not even who you are. What did you gain? What was the benefit? Well, if I've got to do this because if I don't control the way I'm seen, if I don't wear this mask, my friends they won't continue to be my friends. Well, then they're not really your friends at all. What does it benefit? What does it benefit you to get what you want if how you get it means that you lose yourself? And for some of us, we've been doing this for so long that we don't really know the difference anymore. We don't. We can't tell the difference. We can't separate ourselves from the mask. We're to the point now that when we walk into church and you get the question, so how was your week? We always say, man, it was great. We don't even think about it. Man, I'm doing good. I'm fine. We've got the stock responses. And here's what those responses do. They actually stop the conversation. They do. When you ask me, say, how you doing, Cary? And I say, I'm fine. You go, oh, okay. Because we're filtered, we're controlled. Because we have this idea that it's not okay to not be okay, to not have everything together. We have this idea that we have to wear this mask to get the things that we think we need. But the truth is that if in wearing a mask to get something that we think we need, to get a relationship that we think we want, if in doing that we realize that we're not actually getting what we want, we don't get to enjoy it because we always have to keep up the mask by pretending. And that, honestly, that's the second thing in your notes, and I stole this from Pastor Stephen Furtick. God cannot bless who we pretend to be. He can't. If we're pretending to be, how can God bless that? Jesus himself said, a time is coming and is already here when those who worship him will worship him in spirit and in truth. And somehow we think, and when I say we, I'm putting myself right there with you, we think we can walk into a place like this with the mask up, pretending, stand in front of these seats and sing songs of praise to God, and we're just big fat liars about everything that's going on in our life. There's no truth. To be honest with you, when I started praying and thinking about this series, if we're honest, this was the first message I thought of. I wanted to start with this. But the truth is that everything else we've talked about in this series, and really everything that when it comes to trying to authentically follow Jesus, comes out of this. There is no true repentance without honesty. And God's word calls us to repent to the Father, and then it calls us to confess our sins to each other. But there is no confession if we're wearing a mask. There is no confession if we're pretending, and God can't bless that. He can't bless us when we're phony, when we're filtered. It doesn't mean that we say, okay, this is me, this is all my sinfulness, this is just who I am. No, it means, hey, this is me, this is all of my sinfulness, and apart from Jesus, I am stuck like this. But I will never become the person that he wants me to be as long as I pretend to have it all together. God can't bless that. Because we don't fool God with our disguises. And the blessings that we think we're getting when we pretend aren't even real blessings. It's like the blessing that Jacob got. He got the blessing and then immediately had to flee. Because the blessing was never about personal enrichment. Truthfully, he was probably approaching it completely from a superstitious standpoint. But they felt like if I got that blessing, then that would allow me to have the blessing of God on my life. It wasn't about I want that blessing of God on my life. If I were to ask you that question, and don't raise your hand, how many of you want to have the blessing of God on your life? We would all say, yeah. Who wouldn't want that? Is it available? That's like me saying, hey guys, I've got stacks of $100 bills for everybody in the room. Does anybody want one? We would all go, I mean, I'm doing all right, but yeah, I'll take a $100 bill. It's available to you. Why wouldn't you want it? But if we want to experience, the blessing here wasn't about enriching his life. It was about finding the will of God. It was about discerning the will of God and having the blessing of God in our life to guide your life. But when we live a filtered and pretend masked over life, we miss out on the blessings that God has planned for us because we're too busy trying to control our life and the way we're seen. And the only way we get to step into the blessing of God in our life is through authenticity. It's through honesty with ourselves, with God, and with others. So I took a music class, a few music classes when I was in college. And one of our classes was taught by the chair of the music department. And he was teaching a session on breathing, okay? And I still remember that vividly in my mind. Okay, so his name's Dr. Bob McGee, great man. And Dr. McGee is standing there in front of us, and he has his tie on and his coat just like he always did. And he stands there, he's talking about breathing. He's talking about having his chest up. And then he makes this statement. He said, but he said, I always keep my gut in and my chest up. I just do that. I've been doing it for so long, I don't know that if I can really let it out. He makes this statement. And then he turns to the side and lets his gut out. And it goes from here to here. And I was like, good grief, that's an impressive suck-in job. From then on, I've been I've got to just be like that, not letting it out. I want to be able to hold it in like that. And some of us, you guys, you men, you know what I'm talking about, right? You suck it up, you suck it in. Some of you have been doing it for so long, you actually think that's what your stomach looks like now. But it's not. It's a lie. Only when we're honest with ourselves can we begin to experience the blessing of God. Sometimes the blessing of God begins with correction when we're honest with ourselves. And he goes, okay, finally, this is something I can work with. So you admit it. You admit it. You admit that you have a judgmental attitude. You admit that you have a lustful heart. You admit that you like to gossip. You're honest about that. And it took Jacob a long time to figure out that God could not bless the person he pretended to be. It took him about 21 years. See, consider this. He was about 76 or so when he deceived his father. 76. Now, we can have a whole other message about why Jacob's still living at home at 76 and why his mom still had some of Esau's clothes. We don't have time for that. We really don't. So he's 76-ish when he steals the blessing. So that means he's about 97 when he decides it's time to go home. And he says, maybe Esau won't kill me. Been long enough. As it turns out, God couldn't bless the man he pretended to be. Maybe Esau will forgive me. Maybe he won't try to kill me. So he sends gifts ahead to Esau, but he also sends his wives, his possessions ahead. And that's where we find this passage that we first read. It says, Jacob was left all alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Now, when you realize he's 97, you start to realize why his hip came out so easy. Am I right? It's just a matter of time for me. He said to Jacob, let me go, for it's daybreak. But Jacob said this, and notice this: I will not let go unless you bless me. He still wanted the blessing. And from the beginning, he'd been grabbing his brother's heel, and then he'd spent the rest of his life trying to get into the position that his brother had so that he could get what he thought he wanted. And he says, this is my moment. And just like he wouldn't let go of his heel, now he won't let go of this man he's wrestling in the dark. And there's a lot of debate about who this man was. Many people believe that this is a pre-incarnate form of Jesus, wrestling with God in the dark. And he says, I will not let go unless you bless me. He'd been grasping after people and things his whole life. He'd pretended and faked it and filtered his life to try to get what he wanted, to make people think he was something that he wasn't, and try to control the destiny of his life. And now as he wrestles with God in disguise, he refuses to let go. He holds on. I think he knew this was his now or nothing turning point in his life. He also was keenly aware that he was about to cross a river and encounter his brother for the first time in a couple of decades, who was probably still angry. I need the blessing of God. I'm desperate for it. I'm not going to let go until you bless me. It was time to get real. And that's kind of the last thing I have for you in your notes. It's only when we get real that God can begin to use us. So this is a hard lesson for Jacob to learn. This is a lesson I'm still learning. He was 97, I'm about 38. It's only when we get real that God can use us. He doesn't need a plastic, pretend version of who you think you should be or who you think everybody else wants you to be. He says, I won't let you go unless you bless me. And then in verse 27, it says this. He asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he replied. What is your name? Heel grabber, supplanter. I'm a tricker, I'm a deceiver, I'm a pretender. That's who I am. I mean, some of you in here, you may have been given a name at birth that you wish would not have happened. You've been going through life hoping for a nickname. So what's your name? I mean, you can call me whatever you want. No, what's your name? Heel grabber, deceiver, supplanter, tricker, pretender. I can be whoever you want me to be. For some of us, if we're honest, and someone says, so what's your name? We would have to say, well, that depends on who's asking. To those I'm really close with, I'm Cary. To my church, call me Pastor Cary. So I'm not awesome at this, but pretty much what you see is what you get. And I got work to do. What's your name? I'm Jacob. Not anymore. Let's call you Israel. Because you've wrestled with man and you've wrestled with God and you have overcome. Israel, that's a fantastic name. We still hear that name. Yes, they refer to him as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Only when we get real can God use us. In other words, the guy who spent his whole life trying to get something that he wasn't by trying to be somebody that he wasn't, he says, this is who I am. Just a few little sub-notes here. First is it can be painful to let the real me show. Because for some of us, we've been doing it so long, it's going to be painful to detach the mask, to take it off. Because there are people around us that are going to be completely shocked. They've known us for decades and have no idea the truth behind the mask. But God can't bless the person that you're pretending to be. He can't bless a church that's pretending to be something that it's not. We have to be honest. This is who we are. Because blessing only comes when I drop the mask. And one more thing. Purpose, direction, and fulfillment are only found when I let God define me. And you could even say this, when I let God rename me. Your name will no longer be Jacob, he said. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he answered, why do you ask my name? And he gave him what he wanted. He blessed him there. So as we wrap up, know this. Your mask may fool me, but it doesn't fool God. He knows your flaws. He knows your brokenness. I think one reason why God chose maybe the more unsavory of the two brothers was to make this point. God's work depends on His power, not on our worthiness. That's why He chose, I think, maybe why He chose the heel grabber. It's about His power. It's about His holiness. And the mask you wear, it may get you likes. It may get you friends. But at what cost? If we get friends, but they don't really know us, do we even really have them? I think we know inside that we don't. And then the other thing is this. It's just that wearing a mask, even though we think it'd be painful to take it off, it is exhausting. It is exhausting work to be constantly trying to control how you perceive me and what you will think of me. And it's a fool's errand to think that I can ever really pull it off. When Jacob got real, God redeemed him and He renamed him. And He set him to the purpose that had been prophesied. Leader of a nation that would also be called Israel. Jacob had wrestled with God. He had clung to God. And the name spoke of his being bound to God with a bond of life and love of God. Ephesians 4:20-24 says this, since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. When we get real, we have the opportunity to step into exactly the person that God made us to be. But Cary, I'm not crazy about the real me. Don't like what I see in the mirror. Don't like my first instinct thoughts. I'm having to filter all of this. I got to control this. It's okay. God knows you and He loves you anyway. And I'm going to tell you this. The people that I love the most are the ones that are the most real with me. I lived about 15 years of ministry trying to control the way I was perceived. And no one got any closer than about this to me. And I found myself with no real friends. I could control the way you perceive me, but you couldn't really get in because I couldn't get to let you get too close. And I was alone. I was like Jacob, left all alone in the dark. And I mean, not literally the way it happened in this story, but God came and wrestled with me. And I realized I haven't been honest for a long time. Maybe ever. So grateful for the opportunity to step into the new nature, even as someone who's been a believer of Christ for over 20 years. And that's available to you today. So this is the invitation. Let's drop the mask.